Hello, I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. I'm continuing to look in Romans chapters 5 through 8 and how God makes provision for us to deal with the sinful nature. And yesterday we were in verses 12 and 13 of Romans 6, where Paul is telling us to not let the sin nature reign in our mortal bodies. And then he says furthermore in verse 13, he says that we shouldn't present the members of our body to the sin nature as tools for unrighteousness, but that we should present yourselves to God as those that are living from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. So we're talking about, it's easy when we think of members to think of hands and ears and so on and so forth, but there's more to this, I think, than just members, because there's a lot of other things that are built into our nature that I think it would be helpful for us to look at a couple of examples of how we maybe can present these things in a way that God intended them to be used. And to do this, we're going to work backwards by looking at the perversion in Galatians chapter 5. 19, now the deeds or the works of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity or uncleanness, and sensuality. All three of those are sexual works in various ways. God designed sex for a proper relationship between a husband and a wife. Very plainly over in the book of Genesis, the sin nature, Adam's act, has taken that and twisted it. It's perverted it into something else. Obviously, the right exercise, the right use of these various things are in the context of a marriage and of a spouse towards each other in the way that they think about different things. So that one perhaps is maybe an easy one to understand. But if you go on in verse 20, we have idolatry and sorcery. Both of these are alternatives of our relationship to God. Idolatry, where instead of worshiping God, we worship somebody else, another thing, another being. And we trade those things and put them in God's place. Sorcery may be a little bit trickier to understand. The idea of that word had to do with incantations, potions, drugs, all these different things used to produce some sort of a, shall we say, a superstitious or supernatural-like, not really supernatural, but another experience. Because we wanted to have an experience with God. And oftentimes those things were done thinking that in some way, we could control God. It's a big part of what goes on. And rather than trying to control God, look with me at 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9, where Paul says, "For they," referring to people outside of the city of Thessalonica, "report about us what kind of a reception we had with you, the Thessalonian believers, how you turned to God from idols." So they gave up going to idols. They gave up on idol worship, but they turned to serve the living and true God. And so that would be the proper response. You're inclined to engage in some sort of an activity that you think you can control fate, or you can think you can control God, or that gives you an experience. You're looking for some sort of a feeling experience like this in some way, in superstition, whatever that might be. And you can look at this and you can say, you can serve the living and true God. That's what we could do. That would be presenting your members to God rather than presenting those parts of you within your mind and your soul that God designed to be related to God, and you turn them to things of the flesh in this way, idolatry and superstition. Go back over here to Galatians. In the next line here, we have jealousy. But if you look down at verse 21, we have the word envying. And the reason I highlight both of those is because envying is really the issue that most people think of when we have our English Bibles translate this word jealousy. But that word jealousy is, if you can see it over there on the right-hand column, it's the term zelos. And it had to do with this driving passion to excel, to achieve, to accomplish something. And in the negative sense, God gives us this driving passion. He put this in us God didn't intend us to be lazy. He didn't intend us to sit around and do nothing. He intended us to be engaged in activity properly. And so zeal bent as a work of the flesh is where we're so driven by something that we're so focused on working that we don't take care of our spouse. We don't spend time with them. We don't spend time with our kids. We don't spend time with other believers. Everything gets sidelined because we're so focused on work. We're so focused on getting ahead. We're so focused on making money and whatever it might be. And that's one thing. Maybe you've got some activity that you pursue. You love doing this thing so much so that you love fishing so much that you're never home. I've known people like that. It's like, sometimes they used to talk about women being football widows in the fall because their husbands are always focused on paying attention to football. But I've known women that likewise their husbands are gone fishing all the time because they're obsessed with fishing. And there's nothing wrong. God wants us to work, and there's nothing wrong with having an activity that we might do. But sometimes those things become such a preoccupation with us from zeal. We're so obsessed with doing these things and succeeding well that we neglect other people. And as example, in Titus chapter 2 and verse 14, referring to Christ who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify himself a people for his own possession, zealous for good works. God doesn't want us sitting on our hands. God wants us doing things. So God does want us not to necessarily ignore other people in trying to accomplish these good works. But he doesn't want us just going, oh, I've already served. I've done my part. I'm just gonna take it easy now. I'm done helping other people. No. Whenever you're done, you're still got breath in your lungs. If you're still here, God has something for you to do in serving others. And he's got good works for you, good deeds, the New American Standard has here. And you're to be zealous of those, meaning you don't sit there and just sit on your hands. You do push forward. You do push after those, but not with the bent that the flesh would have, where you become so obsessed with the work itself or achieving that itself that you don't care about others. Let's go back to Galatians 5. This last one down here, verse 21, we have envying, drunkenness, and then carousing. And that word carousing is the idea of kind of a wild party spirit and getting together with other people. And there's some people that they just thrive on being with others, just getting together all the time and spending tons of time with other people and just kind of this fervor, this excitement. And the flesh thrives on this to the point that sometimes when we're together and we get involved with other people, we end up doing things that you wouldn't ever think to do if you just calmed down and really thought about that activity. But the group mentality takes over, and we sometimes then get carried away, and I would go back to zeal, that we do things that just don't make any sense. Setting things on fire. I remember watching that happen many years ago, where the group of college students had just got all so excited and they started fires and were overturning items just in all their excitement and fervor of the thing, and they took a good thing and got just way carried away with this. That would be this. Now, what would be a counter to that? Well, Acts chapter 2. This is the very early church. Day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. In other words, believers were getting together and taking time for each other. And it wasn't because there was an incredible party spirit and get carried away. It was to share time together, which maybe wouldn't probably be getting carried away and acting in an insane manner, but actually doing the kind of things that God would want us to be doing in meeting needs, taking time to teach other people, taking time to encourage other people, taking time to help other people that are struggling, taking time to give to their needs, taking time to help them in an area where they need some help in terms of they can't fix a light, and you might serve in that capacity in some way. Showing mercy to those that are suffering. In other words, the exercise of our spiritual gifts, as well as just commonly being able to just spend time and serve other believers. That was the right way. God wanted us to not be disconnected people, but connected people. The flesh goes, and we want to turn that connectedness into this crazy, riotous partying. And that's not God's desire. So do you see how we can take these proper things that God's built into us, these proper desire for God, twist it and prevent it into idolatry and sorcery? No, take it and serve God. How about zeal? Zeal, I've got to achieve this, I got to win, or rather, there's still things out there that God wants me to do, and I will pay attention, and I will do those things when God gives me. I don't want to be lazy, rather than, I've got to get them done, at any cost. No, that'd be the flesh. How about riotous partying? God says, be together. Remember, he says over in Hebrews, he warns believers, don't give up getting together with other believers. You need other saints. You need time with other saints. They need you. But you don't need to turn it into a crazy party. In fact, sometimes in churches, there's some churches that kind of turn church services into kind of a crazy party, or their gatherings into crazy parties, and thinking that will draw people out. And what they're doing is they're technically appealing to their flesh to make it exciting, rather than really saying, hey, let's get together and we can interact in a proper way. Not that we have to be quiet and staid or anything like this, but hopefully you get the idea that there is a better way of interacting without having to act as though you're nuts. All of this to say that when Paul tells us back here in Romans chapter 6 that we can present ourselves to God and present our members as instruments of righteousness, there are some real things that God's built into us that are as much our members as are our hands and our nose and our ears, and God wants us to use those properly. And so when I have counted myself dead to the sin nature, but a living one to God, I then go on and present myself, what does he say there? A living one to God. And I present my members to him to say, how do you want to use these things now? Rather than the way that my flesh wanted to use these, how do you want me to use these? Plug that into your thinking as you're thinking about activities that you sometimes become distracted with. Maybe some of those works of the flesh, you look through those and you go, yeah, I struggle with that. And to say, hey, I'm dead to that. I'm alive to God. And now how does God want me to use properly the thing that he's built into me, rather than this twisted version of it that I read about in the works of the flesh? And as you do that, I know that you'll be able to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you again for joining me.